Oh, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the Packernet Podcast. I am your host and resident panelist, as always, Ryan Schlipp. Check us out online, packernet.com. Find me on Twitter, pack_daddy. Well, let me just say, first and foremost, once again, you guys are phenomenal. Yesterday was a great day for downloads. Today is even better. This is today, based on yesterday's podcast, whatever, is the fourth best day as far as downloads in the entire year. The last time we had a day like this was November 24th. Before that was November 4th, and then September 21st. Those are the only 3 days with higher download numbers than today. And those are also very fluky numbers where the baseline was real low and there was just some massive spike for whatever reason. Packers win something. This has been much more sustained to the point that since about January 5th, I want to say, it is the best week to 2 week stretch of the entire season. Looking back at last year's numbers at this time, it's dwarfing those numbers. So I can't thank you guys enough. I was not expecting such a positive response to my impassioned pleas, but I came into today, I was going to go look at the numbers just before I got started, and I was bracing myself for yesterday was a fluke, today is this big drop-off. And to see a spike again, kind of absurd. So you guys are unbelievable. You are an answer to prayer. We got a long way to go here still, but if you guys can keep this up, then that's going to make a very big difference for me and for my family. So I just appreciate you sticking with me. And like I said, as long as you guys are hanging in there with me, I'm going to continue to hang in there with you. Just going to crank her up to 11. Speaking of, today should be a pretty fun day. I mentioned that the off season, for those that don't know, is the time for drama. And usually it comes by way, with the Aaron Rodgers drama or, the Jordan when he was getting his contract drama and all kinds of stuff like that. Something weird kind of happened. And I guess I wasn't super up on, I had all the tabs open. I was meaning to go look at and read all these different articles and everything, and I didn't get around to it. And it's funny because I just got done recording Packernet After Dark where somebody called in talking about Darren Rizzi, and I got upset. And I was just like, you know what? I just don't want to hear about Rizzi anymore. I'm so sick of this freaking storyline about Darren Rizzi. And hilariously, I was not alone in that. So I think I got to figure out the best way to go about this, but I want today to be somewhat informative in terms of, I guess there's a couple different ways of looking at it. Number one is making sure you have the best available information, not, here is where all the rumors are coming from, here is why people are saying it, here's what we know, here's what we don't know, etc. There's also an element of what I like to do, which I'm, whether you guys care about it or not, whatever. And I need to try to not be condescending when I do it. But the bottom line is, I think that there is a right and wrong way to approach information. And so I not only want to give you the information, but I want to walk you through my whole entire thought process in the dissection that I went through and why, so that we can at least see the error in running to social media, seeing somebody make a claim, and then letting that be the basis for your entire worldview. Because that's essentially what's happened with this Rizzi thing, which, by the way, is off-season 101. We get a tiny nugget that blows up into something that was never said. There's actually another thing with let me give you a little sub-example of that. Yesterday, we went through Tom Silverstein's article, very in detail, about Russ Ball and Ed Policy and all their decisions that they have to make with Matt LaFleur. And you'll notice as I read it, I was talking about, okay, so, this agent said he thinks this, and then later on in the article, they said that somebody else thinks it's a different issue. It's not years. They think it's money, or it could be this. So the bottom line is it was very obvious that this was speculation from people on the outside, which is why I was cautious yesterday to say things along the line of, we don't actually know what's going on, but if this is the case, here's my opinion on it. If it's this, here's my opinion on it. Well, a lot of people didn't do that homework, and I'm seeing articles everywhere saying that the issue with the contract holdup is that the Packers want to offer him 1 to 2 years, and Matt LaFleur wants more. Again, that's not what the article said, and Tom Silverstein had to come out and jump in front of that and say, guys, I didn't say that. I never said that. But at that point, it's too late, and articles are spinning off of that, and Yahoo News and all these different things are saying per sources, this is the situation, this is the holdup, and this is what's going on, and then there's all the firestorm all over social media, and Packers people having opinions on people's opinions, and everything just spirals insanely out of control, which is the beauty of the offseason, by the way. It happens in the regular season too, but there's just so much going on. Whereas now it's kind of like being in open space where things can really spin, and they start spinning and spinning and spinning, and there's no force to act against it to slow it down. And it just takes off in incredible rates of speed. But that was an example of that. This is kind of similar to that. So let me just give you a little bit of background, and I'm going to try to not be. This is not necessarily anybody's exact position, but just in case you don't know what I'm talking about, and you should, because, again, this has been like every caller has called in on this. If you're on social media, it's all anybody is talking about is Rizzy, which, again, I knew something was going on because it's not like everybody just thought about this all at the exact same moment. You know what I mean? Like somebody started a conversation somewhere. It was either a podcast or an article or something, and suddenly everybody is of the opinion that essentially the Packers organization is cheap and they won't spend money on coaches. The more specific argument is that they won't spend money on assistant coaches. They'll spend money on head coaches, whatever, not assistant coaches. I really should do news first, but I feel like we're already head first, so let's just do it. Let me pull up what I believe is the article that started all this. There's kind of two that I found that I think do a lot of the work here. But here is the biggest one. This is the one that is the most referenced, although it's not the only one. This is over at acmepackingcompany.com. Justice Mosqueda, who does a lot of work, he does a really good job of, what I appreciate about him in particular is he does a lot of his homework. I preach a lot about, don't just say things, go do some homework. And he does. And a lot of to be fair, a lot of Packers guys do that. There's a lot of guys who do film, and, Dusty Evely does a massive amount of work. A lot of Packers guys do real good work, but Mosqueda is one of those guys. He will go do research. Now, I'm still going to pick this apart a little bit. I still have my qualms with it, but I think my bigger issue is there's things that are said, and then there are things that are not said, and people need to stop elaborating on things that were never said, spinning it up into things that were never said, and then just running wild with it. But let's start by going through this article. January 13th, Justice Mosqueda wrote, "The Green Bay Packers coaching staff severely lacks outside experience." Now, that particular quote is going to be important because it says some things, and there's a whole lot of things it doesn't say. The subtitle, or whatever it's called, Green Bay's coaching staff ranks last in outside experience among playoff teams, and their assistants are dead last. One of the things, too, before I start this is I need you to pay very close attention to the amount of inference that happens. That is to say, taking logical leaps on things that are not proven. It's just a matter of, this thing happened, which kind of seems like it might be this, which makes it kind of seem like it might be this, and we're taking the kind of seems like and turning it into definitely is. We have to do a very good job of understanding the difference between something that is proven and something that is just sort of inferred, or something that is plausible or even possible. He says, one of the things I continue to keep hammering ever since ESPN's Adam Schefter reported that the Green Bay Packers holdup with head coach Matt LaFleur isn't his performance, but his cost, is that the Packers run a cheap shop when it comes to coach pay. Why am I doing this? Because I hear it almost every year. If I hear the Dan Rizzi lowball story one more time from an agent representing coaches, I might explode. Now, this is important to take a pause here because this is central to the entire story, which is unfortunate because we're making very large claims. There should be lots of information, not just one thing. But believe me, this one thing represents 97% of this whole entire argument. But I'm going to overanalyze this first paragraph. The thing that he is saying that is unproven to this point is the Packers run a cheap shop when it comes to coach pay. Okay, so that is Justice Mosqueda saying it. He says the thing that kind of got him started on this was ESPN's Adam Schefter reported the Packers' holdup with the head coach isn't performance, but his cost. Now, I already have some issues here because he says that the Schefter thing, it's not performance, it's cost. Okay, what is the exact quote here? What is it we're talking about? Where did he say that the Packers don't have an issue with his performance? They're fine with his performance. They're just not sure if they want to pay him. Well, he linked to another article written by himself. In the article, it says money, not confidence in Matt LaFleur is the issue. The quote that he has in his article from Adam Schefter is this: I think the bigger deal is, can they figure out a contract of fair value to keep him there? I think that's what this is about, them trying to negotiate a contract, seeing what they could come up with. If they get a deal done, it's a non-talking point and his future is secure there. If they can't figure out a contract that works for both sides, well, then you have to ask yourself, are they willing to let him go into the last year deal, which he would be, or what do you do about that? Very rarely do teams want coaches going into the last year of their deal, which I believe the priority will be to re-sign to an extension this offseason. So first of all, I didn't hear anything about the performance. Second of all, he said, I think, numerous times, which tells you he doesn't know. It's his opinion. I think the bigger deal is, can they figure out a contract of fair value to keep him there? I think that's what this is about. He doesn't know, number one. Number two, nowhere in there does he say that the Packers are okay with his performance, which is what is sort of implied in this article. It's not performance, it's cost. So there's a quote that doesn't say what he says that it says, that started him down a path to come to a conclusion that the Packers are cheap. Interesting, okay. Then there is this Darren Rizzi story. What is the Darren Rizzi story? There's an article over at Acme Packing Company written by John Meerdink. Packers went cheap on special teams and paid big in the end. The idea here is that Matt LaFleur said, I want Rizzi. And the Packers essentially said, no, he's too expensive. Now, to be fair, in this article, John Meerdink doesn't necessarily say that. He gives a little bit more detail. That's just sort of the lore going on around social media. According to John Meerdink in this article, they did bring in Darren Rizzi. It says, after a visit to Green Bay, Rizzi left without a deal, though he had an offer, a low one, too low to entice him to Green Bay. The Packers reportedly upped their offer later on, but it was too late. Rizzi was bound for New Orleans, and the Saints wouldn't make the same mistake, declining to lowball the man considered to be the best special teams coordinator available. And then it says, instead, the Packers hired Sean Menenga. So right off the bat, just to be clear as far as this lore is concerned, they tried to get Rizzi, and you can say it was the lowball thing. It's similar to Devontae, right? They offered him a lowball offer. He said, no, screw you. And they're like, okay, fine, let me pay you a ton of money. And he's like, no, I'm gone. So it's not true that they passed on Rizzi for Menenga. They tried to get Rizzi first. He said no. They upped their offer. He said no. And then they said, fine, after he already left and went somewhere else, I guess we'll hire Menenga. That's the correct story. It doesn't make it much better for some people, but let's make sure we have that story correct first of all. And by the way, the whole thing later is going to challenge a little bit of this. He says, but for some of you, the anecdotes don't seem to be convincing enough. That would be me. I don't seem to be swayed very much by freaking anecdotes. Then he says, I asked a source how to better paint the picture for the Packers' lack of funding for the coaching staff. He told me to compare Green Bay's coaching experience to other playoff teams. So I ran those numbers for you all by hand. You're welcome. Okay, 2 immediate problems. Maybe one isn't really a problem, but he cites a source. Don't know who that is or how relevant that person is. And there's nothing directly from that source. But I guess that's kind of an irrelevant point because the whole thing is about running these numbers. The bigger issue I guess I have is, why do I care about these numbers? That's going to be the biggest issue I have with this. He goes on to say, the way the Packers have worked for a long time is that when someone is promoted out of a job, they try to fill the role internally. Okay, that's an assertion. I don't really have the proof of that. I mean, again, I know that it does happen, but there's a bigger claim that there is an organizational failure here. That everybody, first of all, wants to go to an outside hire. That outside hires are always better. They're always more experienced. They're always more expensive. And the coach always wants to go outside hire, and the team never wants to let them. That's kind of what I'm left with that is completely unproven. Is it possible that the hire from within is the better hire? Does it mean that they're going to be cheaper? Maybe they might be just as expensive or more expensive. Does it mean that they're less experienced? And do we know that it's the front office doing this as opposed to the coaching staff? These are all my questions that have remained unanswered at this point. They, don't know who they are, will look to outside and spend when they make several misfires in a row, like hiring Rich Bisaccia after several special teams coordinator flubs, or the addition of DeMarcus Covington after bombing back-to-back defensive line hires. The thing I don't like about this is that it's using evidence against the article to prove the point. Well, they don't get outside hires. Yes, they do. Yeah, well, only when things don't work. Well, yeah, duh. That's when you fire people when they don't work, and then you go get people, and sometimes it's internal hire, and sometimes it's an external hire. Well, they only do external when it backfires. Well, duh! They only fire somebody when things go wrong. And then the question is, do they hire external or internal? And sometimes it's external and sometimes it's internal. That's just untrue phrasing of the situation. But their instinct is not to spend at the position. Huh? Whose instinct is to not spend at what position? What are you talking about? And then it says they made an internal promotion at linebackers coach this year when they lost Anthony Campanile, whatever. I'm sorry, was Campanile an external or internal hire? You see what I'm saying? They made an external hire. He got hired away. They promoted from within. See, there's proof. Okay, it's only proof when it's proof, but when it's not proof, what is it? What are we doing here? Here's another one of those anecdotes. Take the Packers replacement for Jason Vrabel, who was promoted from receivers coach to pass game coordinator. Did Green Bay search the globe and run an extensive search to find their next receivers coach? No, they hired their assistant offensive line coach, the guy who gets coffee for offensive line coach, Ryan Mahaffey, to the position. Okay, and what? I mean, again, that's the problem with anecdotes. And why didn't they search the globe? I don't know. Maybe they did. And who's they? Again, was this a Matt LaFleur decision? Was this an Ed Policy decision? Was this a Mark Murphy decision? Was this a Brian Gutekunst decision? Was this a Russ Ball decision? Whose decision was it? Was it a bad hire? Do you even know anything about the guy? I mean, just throwing out random disparaging comments about how he's just some loser that goes and gets coffee and so he shouldn't have gotten the job. I feel like it's your job to prove to me that he's the wrong hire. Again, all of this is plausible. I'm not saying it's plausible. You can even argue that it's the most plausible situation, but you can't just do an entire article of this is most likely and this is most likely, therefore the next most likely, therefore the next most likely. At some point, you have to prove something. You can't just make assertions on top of assertions on top of assertions on top of assertions. We're not getting anywhere. My biggest problem with the organization right now isn't the man at the top so much as the funding for all the other guys underneath him. What is the funding? Do you know what the funding is? What is Matt LaFleur's budget? What are his restrictions? Do you have any idea what these things are? Does he have any? He must have some, but what are they? Has Matt LaFleur ever wanted to hire an internal candidate? Or does he always want to go external and is denied every single time? We don't know the answers to these questions. Again, I think this entire discussion is a very valuable thing. I think it's a good question to raise. I think it's worthwhile to say maybe it's not Matt LaFleur's fault. Maybe it's the organization not willing to pay for things. I don't have any, I think that was a very good thought that somebody brought up. But that's all it is an interesting thought that maybe something is happening. We're taking this way too far when we're making definitive statements about my problem with the organization is that they do this. You don't know that they do that. You made that up based on nothing. Just hopefully some of these numbers I'm about to list will open your eyes, okay? I'm going to skip down a little bit. Including all these coaches, here's how every playoff team's on-field NFL coaching experience sits outside of their time with their current program. So this is how many cumulative years, and this is where Mosqueda does a good job of, I'm guessing he hand-calculated all this stuff, how many years of experience on other teams people have. So if somebody's been with the Packers for 10 years and has never been anywhere else, then his what he adds is 0. If somebody spent 2 years somewhere else, then it's 2. I'm not going to go through all these, but Seattle Seahawks are at the top with 129. Panthers, Bears, Bills, and 49ers are all above 100. Broncos, Jaguars, Patriots in the 90s. Chargers, Steelers, Eagles in the 80s. Texans in the 70s. Rams in the 50s. Packers in the 40s. It's definitely an interesting thing. It's an interesting data point, no doubt about it. And again, what it does, there's a question of what it does and what it doesn't do. What it does is add a little bit of intrigue to the question. It doesn't prove anything. It's an interesting note that could potentially support one position, but it could also just be several other things. Again, maybe it's a Matt LaFleur thing more so than a Green Bay Packers thing. Also, the other thing we can't do is determine whether this is good or bad, right? Note that the Carolina Panthers is the second highest on this list and are probably the worst playoff team of the bunch. The Rams are at 59, well below everybody else. Higher than us and well below the next lowest team, which is the Texans, and they're probably the best team in the playoffs. So we haven't really asserted that bigger numbers are better, right? But, it can kind of provide a little bit of clarity on some things. For example, if you were specifically wondering for a random reason, do the Packers have less outside hires than other teams? The answer is yes. Is that good or bad is not answered, and why is not answered. Also, the other issue, and this will come up later as well, this is a snapshot of this year. It doesn't point to a systemic problem. We don't know what it's going to look like next year. We don't know what it looked like last year, or 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. He starts off immediately after this saying, uh-oh, that's not good. Why is it not good? I don't know why that's not good. The other 13 teams that made the playoffs this year averaged 97.5 years, again, the Rams at 59, of outside experience on the coordinator and assistant level. The Packers have less than 50% of that on the staff. That strategy, as agents put it, is Green Bay's way of saving money on the coaching level. Now, this would be beautiful if he would provide what agents said what, but I have no idea what he's talking about. I tried to find that. I couldn't find it. It would have been a gold mine if he could put it in the article, but I don't know what he's referencing when he says that. In fact, you could probably scrap this entire article and just say, here's what agents have said directly about the Packers. They don't spend money on this, that, or the other. That would have been great, but it's not in here. And then it says, why hire Rizzi when you can hire Sean Menenga? Again, the article he linked to directly said they tried to get Rizzi first, and then after Rizzi walked away, we got Menenga. So again, the idea that we chose not to hire Rizzi because he was too expensive and decided to go with Menenga instead is just false. As written in the article he linked to. Then his second big list of numbers. Speaking of special teams coordinator, Bisaccia is clearly the most veteran coach on the Packers roster, coming in with 20 years of NFL service as an on-field coach outside of Green Bay. The Packers also didn't have a problem grabbing Jeff Hafley as their defensive coordinator either. Interesting. He's an outside hire, as is DeMarcus Covington, as is Ansley, as was some of the guys he brought over from Boston College. Almost the entire defensive staff was an outside hire, which is weird that Jeff Hafley has more money to spend and more freedom to pick his coaches than Matt LaFleur does. It's a very odd situation that we have set up, but apparently that's what we have to conclude. He says, their real problem has been at the non-coordinator level. They're true assistant coaches. So what is this team's true assistant pool experience matchup compared to other teams' playoffs? In the playoffs, Seahawks, again, 119, on and on down here. Packers all the way at the bottom at 21. Now, again, it does and doesn't prove certain things, but there's still going to be questions. For example, are older coaches better than younger coaches? Well, they're more experienced. Yes, but when you're out looking for a head coach, raise your hand if you're looking for a young, up-and-coming, intelligent coach, or if you're looking for an old, grizzled veteran. 9 times out of 10, we want the young coach. And you could try to make the argument that's not true about, like position coaches where more experience is needed. Maybe. But again, that's a claim you're going to have to more than assert. You're going to have to actually make that case. For example, we went out and got, our quarterback coach to come in. Why? Because he's young and brilliant. The idea that somehow works against us in these numbers because he's young as opposed to being some 80-year-old guy that's been floating around forever is kind of a weird assertion. He says, this is where the Packers stick out like a sore thumb. The 13 other NFL playoff teams average 77.6 years of on-field experience. Yeah? I mean, are we making the case that we should just get older? Because I feel like now we're making a different argument than the Packers don't spend, unless we're saying that older people are always more expensive. And so instead of getting the young up-and-comers who are cheap, apparently, we should be going out and getting the old guys that have a bunch of experience that are expensive. I'm sorry, it doesn't say what I think it wants to say, and it definitely doesn't say it as convincingly or as conclusively as I think it believes it's saying it. Then down below it says, LaFleur did not have full control on his initial staff, which was on a budget. And the team wanted to avoid buyouts when possible. I've been told that a condition of any coach willing to take a head coaching job in 2019 was that defensive coordinator Mike Pettin was locked into his job in part because of his buyout cost. It is an industry standard to have contracts essentially be fully guaranteed in an NFL level. There's a lot. So again, this is like taking something and kind of like distorting it to make it fit like a certain narrative. It's taking a square peg and trying to slam it into a round hole. There's a lot of issues here. Again, if you just read that, it's like, see, there's more proof. Hold on. First of all, the idea that LaFleur didn't have full control of his initial staff is not a fact. That's being reported from this NBC Sports article. I don't know who wrote it. Packers coach Matt LaFleur has put together a coaching staff in Green Bay, but may not have been exactly the staff he would have hired if it had been all up to him. LaFleur wasn't the sole decision-maker when it comes to hiring assistant coaches, Tom Silverstein of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reports. Well, let's actually go to the article that Tom Silverstein wrote as opposed to the interpretation of what Tom Silverstein wrote. First of all, this entire article written by Tom Silverstein really had nothing to do with it. I shouldn't say it had nothing to do. The main point of the article was not about Matt LaFleur and his control over this. His main point in this article was to talk about the management structure that seemingly was going to be restructured into this whole silos thing where Matt LaFleur would report to McCarthy and all that stuff. That was the main point of this article. They talked a ton about Russ Ball and how some people liked him, but some people didn't. There's all kinds of, again, I'm not saying that Silverstein is distorting anything. He's laying out all the different things. Here's what somebody said, but somebody contradicted that. A lot of people said that Russ Ball was not likable. However, LaFleur was asked, and he said those are just jealous people that are upset that Russ Ball's in this position, and they're not. You have to scroll way, way, way down to get to a paragraph like this. Gutekunst does not have authority over LaFleur or Ball except with roster decisions, and LaFleur has little of the influence McCarthy had when it came to fight for something he wanted. So far, LaFleur has been allowed to make changes around the facility and add some former colleagues to his staff, but at least one friend worried that Murphy and Ball would lord over him. Murphy insisted LaFleur has autonomy with his coaching staff, is being given everything he needs to succeed, and won't be interfered with. Murphy is his boss, and only Murphy has the authority to give him everything he wants. In fact, even if we look at the NBC article, in terms of, okay, so then what is NBC talking about? Listen to what it actually says. I'm begging you to freaking read the articles. People are killing me. So again, it says, if you just read the top, LaFleur wasn't the sole decision maker when it comes to hiring assistant coaches. That's what Tom Silverstein said, according to NBC. Okay, what did it say then, NBC? That detail comes in a long story that is heavy on anonymous sources and short on direct quotes. Well, that in and of itself is a problem. But it paints a picture of burgeoning dysfunction in the Packers front office, where LaFleur, general manager Brian Gutekunst, and director of football operations Russ Ball are all vying for authority under Packers president, CEO, and Mark Murphy. Okay, the first part is very important. Anonymous sources and short on direct quote. Then it says the story hints at several issues in Green Bay, but the issue with assistant coaches is particularly noteworthy because sources contradict the claim from Murphy that Matt was allowed to make his own decisions. Okay, you understand what this is saying. It's saying that there's a lot of different reports, and some reports are saying that Matt didn't get what he wanted, and other reports are saying that Matt did get exactly what he wanted. And then it gives the Rizzi story. LaFleur tried to get Rizzi, but was unable to land him because the Packers lowballed him on a contract, which, first of all, again, lowballed him on a contract is relative. It means they offered him something less than what he was asking. What that number is, I don't know. Also, that's entirely different than saying he's not allowed to make his own decisions. They didn't tell him no. He said, I want Rizzi. They said, okay. They flew him out to Green Bay. They had meetings with him. They offered him money, and Rizzi said no. And then they upped their offer, and Rizzi still said no. This is the best example we have of, by the way, a first-year head coach. So even if this is true, you understand we're much later in his tenure now. The idea that maybe they put some restrictions on him in year one, that even if you could prove that, which nobody has, what does that have to do with right now? Nothing. So again, going all the way back now. No, we need to take a break. Let's take a break. We'll do one break today, I think. Okay, so going all the way back to the article now, the initial article. LaFleur did not have full control of his initial staff, which was on a budget, and the team wanted to avoid buyouts when possible. Okay, this was speculation. Again, they're all little interesting tidbits that you could connect and put together in sort of a conspiracy theory kind of a way to paint a picture and say, I believe it's the most plausible that the Packers are more restrictive than most teams when it comes to paying these low-level coaches. You would have to add on top of that, if you're being honest, I don't have a lot of good data on that, but I kind of think that's what's going on. Those are the strongest possible ways and terms that you could possibly say this. Saying this with your chest is crazy. This, to me, is the crux of the issue with the Packers and has been for a long time. It's always the assistant spend. Again, it's an assertion. Well, that brings us to this. And again, I thought I was going to end up being alone on this, and that's when I caught wind of this video here. This is from Wilde and Tausch. They had Rob Domofsky on, and just kind of out of nowhere, this happened.
Which I actually wrote down some notes of things that I wanted to talk about.
All right, bring it up. Well, let's just let Rob take over.
The first thing I heard when I tuned in was the Darren Rizzi bullcrap bullshit argument. Okay?
Whoa,
Darren Rizzi was never coming to Green Bay.
Ooh,
ever. Okay? I'm so tired of everyone basing stories on the Packers being cheap because of misreported crap about Darren Rizzi. Okay? Darren Rizzi didn't want to shovel snow. He didn't want to go out and do what I did. Okay? His family wasn't moving here. They offered Darren Rizzi exactly what New Orleans or Miami or whatever godforsaken NFL city he preferred to go to. Okay? So forget the Darren Rizzi crap for once and for all.
Okay. Just wait, Jason will.
Which, by the way, first of all, very much an insider in this situation. It doesn't contradict. Everybody's, you're contradicting Silverstein. Not really. We already got the story that they upped the offer, and he said no. Right? This is just additional context that he said no to the upped offer because he never wanted to come here to begin with. He didn't want to be in Green Bay. He wanted to be somewhere warm. Right? So it's not even a contradiction. But again, if we remove the Darren Rizzi thing, this entire thing almost goes to zero. This entire argument goes almost to zero, with the exception of a couple little things, like in the Mosqueda article, where it's like, well, look at the total number of outside coaches. Yeah, that's interesting. There's going to be a comment on that here, though.
Goldie reported that, so this is the interesting part of this.
No, it was that was Tom Silverstein's story.
But you have also jumped on and said this, so the Rizzy stuff is crap, is what you're saying, Rob.
He wasn't coming here, okay? He did, yes. Did he turn the Packers down? Yes. Okay. But it had nothing to do with money. He didn't want to come here.
Interesting. Okay, Jason.
Right?
Counterpoint,
so
Jason.
It goes to some article written by Justice Mascapa or whatever his name is, basing it around that. All right.
This is feisty.
So sassy.
I think I had a Moscata for a drink last night.
That's a tequila, right? Is Moscata a tequila?
20 years of experience on their coaching staff, right? Okay, well, if you did this 13 months ago, it's more than double that because Tom Clements had 35 years of experience.
Right. And that was the point I made also in terms of this only takes a snapshot of this year. That doesn't point to an institutional problem, because you can look at other years where we had more experience on the coaching staff, and who cares if we did or didn't? Did that make that, would that have like done anything for anybody? Should we just bring back old guys? No, I mean, we had old guys, and who cares? What does that matter?
Or whatever. So another bull crap a storyline, okay? Just another more crap. And if you guys post this crap on Twitter and sound grab me, I quit.
Well, there you go, boys. Don't sound.
All right, so, and by the way, he's getting clipped like crazy, which is hilarious. I don't know why he's so mad about stuff. Look, so again, that was kind of what got me started on this whole thing. When I saw that video, I was like, okay, I got to figure out what the heck is going on. And that's when I started reading through the articles and all that kind of stuff. And again, I'm not trying to be adversarial to the article insofar as saying I believe the opposite. I'm simply saying if you want to sell me on a story, you have to prove it. And all I see is, again, everything feels like the way conspiracy theorists handle things. They have these sort of loosely connected pieces from all across the universe. Like, well, if you look over here and connect this to this over here and just assume, you got to fill in a lot of blanks, then boom, I figured it out. It's not proof in any real sense of the word. It's not anything that would ever hold up in court or anything. It's, again, the only thing I can think of is it reminds me of how conspiracy theorists, quote unquote, prove things or how they come to believe certain things. Again, I think it's all very interesting, and I'm glad that this point was raised, and it might be true. And I have no problem with somebody saying, I think this is the most plausible thing. But we are so unbelievably far from proving anything, it's crazy. So here's what I did as a fun exercise, okay? I went over to the robot, and I said, here's an article. I want you to steel man this argument. So steel manning is the opposite of straw manning, as opposed to just lying about what it says. I need you to represent this as best as you possibly can, because it's important that you don't misrepresent what Justice is saying. You don't want to argue against something that he is not claiming. And so I need you to give me exactly what he is saying and exactly what he isn't saying. And then I told AI to argue his point as best as you possibly can. I'm going to bring up critiques. You need to slap them down as hard as you can. So while you're not misrepresenting him, make sure you don't steer off course. Make sure you stay exactly on course with only what he's saying. I need you to argue his points for me. So first of all, the steel man version of the argument. Let me allow AI to steel man Justice Mosqueda so that he's not straw man and so that he is not misrepresented, assuming AI can do a good job of that. It says, at its strongest, the argument is not that the Packers are cheap in general, nor that Matt LaFleur is incapable, but that Green Bay operates with a structurally flawed coaching labor model that creates a competitive disadvantage at the margins where the NFL games are actually won. And again, I really do think this is an interesting discussion, and I don't want this to just be slapping around different people or trying to take sides, because I think this is a very interesting discussion, and I think it's entirely plausible that this is exactly what's happening. I need to make that very clear, because it is an interesting discussion to say that, there was, and I feel like I might have misplaced, and I got to go find the stupid article, but it was I don't even want to do it until I can find the article, because it's like parallel to Justice Mosqueda's article. But the point is, you can see a scenario where you devalue that position, the position of whatever. And so then you can see why you're not getting a lot of growth, which was the main point, I think, of the other article, which talked about how, draft and develop, the second part of that is develop, which is very important, and our guys are not doing that, which is something I want to start digging into a little bit to see if that's true. I expect it will be, but I don't know. It's something that I say, a lot of people say. I want to get some definitive closure on that, but that's not today. Let me continue with the Steel Man. The Packers correctly invest in players and run an above-average front office, but they systematically undercapitalize the coaching layer responsible for translating talent into consistent execution. The other good thing about this is it does answer the question of what is wrong, right? It does answer the question of how can we keep Matt LaFleur, but also fix the systemic problem. Again, my issue is none of this is actually proven, but it is an interesting theory that could answer that question. By relying on internal promotions and low-experience assistants, they reduce costs but also reduce institutional knowledge, adaptability, and problem-solving capacity on game day. This matters because NFL coaching is not linear development. Teaching young players while simultaneously teaching inexperienced coaches compounds risk. Experienced assistants shorten learning curves, anticipate failure points, and correct issues before they metastasize into systemic problems. And on it goes. Now, there's a lot of back and forth, and I don't want to take you through every single thing because I argue something and it argues back, and I argue something and it argues back. And the whole point of this is to slowly start to narrow this down into something that is more and more and more accurate. So at one point, it comes out and says, I'm going to stop hedging and argue it cleanly, casually, and narrowly while conceding where the original author overreaches. Below is the strongest version of the case that still survives your objections, followed by what does not survive. The defensible claim, and this will further be refined, the defensible claim must be, at the NFL playoff level, assistant coaching inexperience is a material disadvantage in high-variance, execution-sensitive phases of the game, and the Packers have concentrated that risk more than their peers. One of the things it did go on to do that I wanted to highlight, as I said, is how you could, if you wanted to, and I'm kind of putting words in Justice's mouth, but I'll argue on his behalf here. You could argue that experience, age, is actually important in these particular cases, as opposed to wanting the young, brilliant mind to, run a team, which seems entirely backward. But it goes on to say, assistant coaches are not primarily innovators, they are error correctors. Their job is pre-snap alignment fixes, technique refinement, communication under stress, contingency recognition. Those skills are experiential, not conceptual. All right, fair enough. Again, that's just something I'm going to put in my back pocket to think about down the road. Maybe we don't need the young innovators to do this kind of stuff. We need the old crotchety guys that have been there, done that, they've seen it all, they know what to do. Doesn't seem to be the case with Bisaccia. But, again, it's maybe, sure, fair enough, I guess, kind of, sort of. Goes on to say a 32-year-old offensive assistant may understand modern run-pass conflict theory better than a 55-year-old, but he's seen fewer defensive counters, coached fewer protection breakdowns, lived through fewer late-game failure cascades. At the margins of playoff football, pattern recognition beats novelty. Yeah, maybe, fair enough. It's an interesting concept to consider. And then after a couple more iterations of pushing back on a couple other things. And the whole point of this exercise is to slowly whittle away at the claim to get to the point where ultimately the article says kind of nothing. That's kind of the point. When you slowly whittle away at what actually we know, what actually can be proven, there's almost nothing left. And so again, if you want it to be more of an opinion piece and say, look, here are a couple data points, they're very loose data points that without a lot of information or a lot of, concrete data, it's just sort of rumors that have been counteracted by other rumors, but they're out there floating around. I wonder if it's this, which could explain this. I think that would be a better way to do this kind of an article, as opposed to trying to make it more of a factual, data-driven article, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really do much. So let me just, as we go down here, it says, your objection is decisively stated. Regardless of cause, the Packers have consistently ended up with one of the least experienced assistant coaching staffs. That claim cannot be supported by this article. The article provides exactly one data point, the current season. From an evidentiary standpoint, that supports only this statement. In the current season, the Packers have one of the least experienced assistant coaching staffs among playoff teams. Anything stronger, consistently, habitually, structurally, is an extrapolation without proof. The moment the word consistently is removed, meaning we know over the last 10 years, now he could do this if he wanted to. He could do a part 2 and say, okay, fine, I went and did the data for the entirety of Matt LaFleur's career, and then he could add consistently back in. But without doing that, we just have a 1-year snapshot. We don't have a consistently that we can go off of. So it says, the moment the word consistently is removed, several downstream claims collapse. Organizational philosophy cannot be inferred. Spending habits cannot be inferred. Historical precedent cannot be inferred. Causal links to repeated failures cannot be inferred. What remains is a snapshot, not a pattern. In serious analysis, especially organizational or structural analysis, snapshots do not justify institutional critique. What the argument can still legitimately say, and nothing more. Once corrected, the strongest defensible claim becomes, this year, relative to other playoff teams, the Packers' assistant coaching staff has less cumulative outside NFL experience, which may introduce execution risk in certain units. And again, when we whittle it down to that, fair enough. What do we know? We know about the experience. Anything else, we don't know. But I'm open to the idea that it may introduce execution risk in certain units. There's another major problem here, though. We never at any point established who's responsible for this. I don't know that it isn't Matt LaFleur making these decisions. Never has that been established. It says that's it. It's not they always do this, they refuse to spend, they only act after failure, this explains past issues. None of those claims have been supported in that article. It says why the article feels convincing despite being underproven. And that's, I saw a lot of people sharing this and it was, wow, this is it. This is the nail in the coffin. This is why. Number one, a real quantifiable current state disparity. In other words, it showed a number that was small and it showed everybody else with numbers that were big, almost. Again, under any real scrutiny, you immediately look at it and say, okay, what do the numbers mean? Why do I care? Is this linear? In other words, does it correlate to success? Which the answer to that was no. The Rams are at the bottom. The Panthers are at the top. I would also be curious to see what teams not in the playoffs look like to further prove whether there's any correlation to success. That's not in there. Number two, anecdotes that sound like pattern evidence. Now, to be fair, he did point out that a lot of that stuff was anecdotal, but the entire thing was anecdotal. And it was in a lot of ways painted as being patterns. Number three, reader memory of past failures. So in other words, you can stoke the fires of like, remember how bad the special teams has been? Bro, think about it. The brain connects those into a story. And again, this is what I'm talking about in terms of the conspiracy theory thing. It's just, I'm going to point out like these 5 data points and I'm going to trust your brain is going to connect those dots and go, whoa, like we're all tripping on freaking acid. Dude, like it's all connected, bro. Well, yeah, it's connected into what I don't know, but it's, I can draw lines to connect. It's like one of those connect the dot drawing things, except it's not a picture when you're done. So that's the thing that flared up, and I don't know if this is going to continue or it's probably going to fizzle out. I don't expect this to become some long running feud or anything. And again, I'm not trying to take sides in the feud thing. I'm not trying to be a douchebag to Justice or anything like that. I know that's probably how it comes off, but I don't care. I'm just trying to say what's true and what's real. Again, I think it's a very interesting thing to bring up. I think it's plausibly true. I'm not in any way saying that I don't believe it. I'm saying it's entirely plausible, but I'm also saying that I'm very much frustrated and annoyed, as was Domofsky, at this sort of weird thing we do where we point out a couple data points and then that turns into a giant story. And then we blow this up into this massive thing that is, I don't want to say not true, but it takes on a life form of its own and it just becomes lore. It just becomes like what we all accept and know. Now everybody just knows that the Packers are cheap and they won't spend money on coaches and that's the problem. And that Matt LaFleur has always wanted to go out and get these great coaches. But now nobody will, the Packers will never allow him to get the coaches that he wants. And so they're holding him back, man, because they're cheap and everybody knows it. Like it's just become this giant thing. And it's like, what are you talking about? Where is this coming from? Again, maybe it's true. Just like maybe it's true that Matt LaFleur's eyebrows are the cause for the team not believing in him. They're like, that dude's a freaking loser, and I'm not playing for that guy. I mean, it's possible. It's plausible. It could happen. But outside of that, I got nothing. Like, what are we talking about? I found the other article, by the way, and this was written January 14th, so right in that same time. So was it the same day, actually? One day later. This was written by Archon14. I don't know who that is, but Archon wrote, draft and develop requires the development part 2, as in also. And the position coaches are kind of important for that in Green Bay. This is basically a part 2 to the article. It's basically the same thing of, we need to develop guys, and because you guys suck at hiring good coaches to develop, we don't ever develop. Now, I don't want to go word for word through this whole thing. In the second paragraph here, he writes, if you allow me to take a trip down my formal training lane, labor costs are going to be well correlated to labor quality in the aggregate. This isn't necessarily true in markets with severe distortions, like the market for professional sports players, where drafts, league minimums or maximums, and collective bargained nuances whittle away at the typical efficiencies seen in the broader labor markets, but the NFL coaching market doesn't work like that. So the only reason I really bring that up is he has some presumably economics training is what it sounds like, or something in that realm. But I feel like we're doing kind of the same thing in this, even though it's maybe articulated a little bit more scientifically. Next paragraph down, allegedly not very well. In fact, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter, the coach spending standards in Green Bay are part of the problem of the negotiation, not just for LaFleur himself, but what he can spend on his staff. That's important news. Here is the quote, though. They have certain budgets that they want to stay within and certain money allocations they're used to spending. As an example, the New York Giants are paying Brian Daboll, I don't know the exact number, but let's call it $7 million a year. If they want to go hire John Harbaugh, are they going to pay double or triple that? Yesterday's prices are not today's prices. You want to get the best of the best, you're going to have to pay for that. I don't know exactly what Matt makes right now, but if the Packers want to go hire John Harbaugh, they might have to end up paying close to double in salary. Double. Maybe I'm an idiot, but where in that quote did it say what I was expecting it to say? Adam Schefter said the coach spending standards in Green Bay are part of the problem of the negotiation. I must have missed it. I don't know. And then it says, our own Justice Mosqueda outlined the severe lack of external experience on staff currently, which again is like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, and this is the other thing where it's like we take bad data, then we use it as evidence to support more bad data, to create bigger monsters. Not to say that he's misrepresenting it. He's mostly just talking about how all the coaches, staff hires have been internal, but it just fails the same questions of like, why are they internal? Whose decision is that? Is that always bad? Could that sometimes be good? You know what I mean? Like we're just I don't know. We're trying to say too much. Although I don't necessarily disagree. I mean, I think it's new. Here's the final paragraph that again, it makes a lot of sense. I just don't want to say more than what we need to be saying. If you're an organization that, as a matter of ideology, is a draft and develop organization, the latter part has to actually happen. And I agree with that, and I've talked about that. Where the heck is the development? Again, I'll be looking into that at some point in the near future. If you want the latter part to happen, you believe in the general accepted laws of labor economics, you should probably be spending more than the average team in the NFL on your positional coaching staff, not prioritizing savings, thereby promoting often underqualified internal candidates. If you are an organization that relies on the development of young players you draft, you do not put them in the best position to succeed if you're not providing them with upper echelon coaches who are working with them on a daily basis. I don't really disagree with that. But I also don't know that that's happening. We went out and got DeMarcus Covington, who was a former defensive coordinator. We got Derek Ansley, who is a former defensive coordinator. We've gotten a lot of guys. And again, I don't see how I'm supposed to believe that the Packers just refuse to let them do it, as opposed to, maybe if we just drop the whole Packers are cheap thing, which I know nobody wants to do because that's like this core thing that we genuinely want to believe. But I think it's much more interesting if we start from zero and we just say, look, position coaches are important, right? Duh. It's kind of the same conversation we have about special teams. Nobody wants to care about special teams. The same fan base that's pissed about our lack of investment in special teams will riot if we draft a kicker, right? Nobody wants to invest in special teams until it doesn't work, and then everybody wants to invest in special teams. Nobody wants to pay a kicker until you get a kicker that can't make kicks, and suddenly it's like pay whatever it needs, because it is important. The point is special teams is more important than anybody ever wants to acknowledge. When things are good, we don't care if a kicker leaves. We don't care about anything. It's whatever, because we forget how bad it can get. And I think it's plausible that the Packers do that with their assistant coaches. Now, there are realities in the world. It's much like a salary cap that exists it's kind of like saying if you believe that offensive line matters in a football team, then presumably you'd want to spend as much money as you possibly could, because there's a general correlation between money spent and how good a player is. Now, there's certainly nuance in that and flaws in that, as far as, for example, rookies, which you could say, well, that doesn't apply to coaches. Well, it kind of does. You think internal candidates, you can't hire like really promising internal candidates for less money than letting them hit the market? You probably could before anyone discovers them. You know what I mean? But also, it just kind of disregards the idea that there's any kind of a cap to your money. We don't have infinite money. And if there is a limit, which of course there is, the question isn't, should you spend as much money as possible? The question is, how should the fixed pie be allocated? Where, maybe even a better question is, where would you want to save money? Do you want to save money on the special teams coordinator? Should we spend all our money at the top? In other words, we get a good head coach, we get a great head coach, and then a good offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, special teams coordinator, and then skimp as you go down? Should we prioritize offense over defense? Where would you cut? Well, I wouldn't cut anything. I spent no. There are limits to money. Where would you spend the money? If the entire crux of this is the Packers need to recognize how important every single position is, and so they should spend as much money as possible on every single position. That's, I don't know, not exactly brilliant. Yeah, if you had infinite money, would you go out and buy all the best coaches? Yeah. I'd go get 6 head coaches. How about that? Now, if you really cared. And so again, in order for there to be some kind of a massive scandal, you'd have to know how much money the Packers have at their disposal, look at how much of a percentage they spend on each particular thing as compared to other teams, to be able to say that they underspend. Well, everybody else pays X amount of percentage on certain things, on coaches in general and on assistant coaches, and the Packers pay less because they're cheap, because they just want to hoard money to build title towns. Something, you know what I mean? Like there's all these implications that they're cheap. What do you mean they're cheap? How much money do they spend as a percentage of their total revenue compared to other teams? We don't know any of this. We don't know how much we spend on we know nothing. So outside of being an interesting thing, it's kind of like, I don't care if you think we should keep Matt LaFleur or let Matt LaFleur go, or if we should keep Rashawn or get rid of Rashawn, or whatever the case may be. I care more about the process you went through to come to that conclusion. You know what I mean? If it's just kind of like a feeling in your belly, in your tummy, that's kind of rumbling around, great, dude, cool, I don't know. You know what I mean? I mean, I don't freaking know, man. There's just not enough here. There's not even enough here to talk about, like, well, where there's smoke, there's fire. I mean, bro, there's not even smoke. We have to go back to 2019 in a completely unusual year where we got a brand new GM, a brand new coach who is very young and inexperienced, and a brand new leadership structure on reports that maybe they had some say in his coaching decisions, although maybe they didn't, and that has nothing to do with what happened after that point, and maybe they lowballed Rizzy, and we don't even know what lowballed means, although we do know that they offered him as much as what the Saints ultimately offered him, and Rizzy said no thank you because he didn't want to be here. Like, this isn't even smoke. Yeah, but look how few internal can't. Okay, and how many was it last year and the year before that and the year before that? And if so, why? Is it because Matt LaFleur maybe prefers continuity? Is that a theory we can run with? Or do we only allowed to think of that one theory that's possible? I don't get it. But let me end with this. Ultimately, at the end of the day, all we can ever really do for most of these things is guess. That's all we can really do. We don't have the information we need to come to definitive conclusions. But we need to do a better job of admitting that we don't know things and admitting that our positions are based on what makes the most sense to me, as opposed to just making claims. Well, I don't think the Packers will do it because they're cheap, and everybody knows they're cheap. No, everybody doesn't know that. Stop frickin' saying that. I don't know, man. I don't know. All I know is I'm going to do Packernet After Dark tomorrow, and I'm going to have 10 callers telling me about frickin' Darren Rizzy, because that's the new thing we all got to talk about now, and I'm going to lose my mind. Anywho, I'm going to get out of here. I will talk to you later. Have a good one.